The Shadow Man. My very first memory of anything paranormal was from right before I started school, so I'm going to guess I was about 4. I'm a child of the 80s, so my favorite toy was a play kitchen with buttons that made noise. There were 4 buttons. I don't remember what they all were, but one was bacon sizzling, and one was eggs cracking. We lived in these apartments at the time, and the rooms were actually pretty big. My bed was in the corner of the same side as the door, so I could see into the hallway at night. I'd like to note here that I wasn't afraid of the dark until I was about 13, so the only light at night was the street lamp in the window. My play kitchen was kitty corner to my bed, directly across from the bed and next to the window. For several months, I would be woken up by the sound of eggs cracking and bacon sizzling. Just those 2 noises, over and over, until I'd get up to see what was happening. This didn't bother me, because at the time, I had no real concept of what a ghost was. To me, ghosts were floating white sheets with eye holes and chains, and they were very much fake. So, after it ran out of batteries, we didn't replace them, and that's when I started to see what I now know as a shadow being. It was 6 or 7 feet tall. I would wake up and see it standing at the foot of my bed. I'd scream, and as soon as Mom would turn the hall light on, he'd just be gone, in the blink of an eye. My brain still has a hard time comprehending it. That went on for months as well. Toward the end, he was standing next to my bed. I'd pull the covers over my head, hoping it'd go away, but it would sometimes just get closer until I screamed. We only stayed in that apartment for about 8 months because my mother saw it one night while sleeping in my room. The Victorian Man. Okay, so I was completely obsessed with Phantom of the Opera for years after hearing the musical. I've seen all of 3 pieces of Phantom-related movies. I have 20 copies of the book with different covers. The very first being one with a pretty creepy half-face that looks like smoke. I was 12 when I first read it. Honestly, I was disappointed with the first, 3 chapters of the book, so it took a month for me to get through it. At that time, I was living in the living room. That's a long story I won't get into, but room setup is important here. The living room is a weird shape because part of it backs up to the kitchen and the other part to a bedroom. So you walk in, and to your right, there's a 5-foot wall that then goes back 3 feet, and then the rest of the 6 feet to the wall facing the backyard. So I had a sliding door, and my bed was right up against the wall by the door, leaving about 2 feet between it and the aforementioned 5-foot wall. I had these shelves that ran the wall. I had a bunch of ancient books and random little knickknacks on it. It's going to be important to note here that I could not reach the items on the shelf while sitting on my bed. I had to get up and stand between them and the bed. In the left corner, I had a chandelier hanging over an electric baby grand piano. My dresser was by it, and I had a couch and coffee table. So one night, I woke up and my creepy-faced book was at my feet, staring up at me like someone had come in and put it on the bed. So that freaked me out. I put it back on my nightstand and thought I had maybe done it in my sleep. But about an hour later, I woke up again with it at my feet. But this time, there was a man in Victorian clothing sitting on the couch at the foot of my bed. I was not totally awake, so I moved my pillow to the foot of the bed and motioned for him to come over. He got up and came over, and I asked him to hand me the bird nest on my shelf. It was this weird little toy thing with hay glued together and ceramic eggs. I can't to this day explain why that was what I asked for, but he obliged. He walked over between my bed and shelf, handed it to me, and just stood there. I thanked him and turned over, tucking it under my arm like a stuffed animal, and went back to sleep. When I woke up in the morning, I thought at first that it was a weird dream because I didn't have the nest on the bed. But it wasn't on the shelf either. So when I picked up my pillow to move it back, I found the nest. I guess I'd shoved it under the pillow in my sleep. From then on, anywhere I was, he was. He would pace outside rooms. I'd see his pants and shoes walk in and out of the corner of my eye. And I'd see him in any mirror I passed, usually no more than a foot behind me. He actually has an entire chapter in the book I'm working on because he was with me for 16 years. The boy. We moved into a house when I started high school, and it had its own ghosts. It was a fixer-upper, and it took close to a year to get it livable. So I picked my room, we got it painted, I got new sheets and blankets set to match, and I started decorating. I was used to the Victorian man by now, though I would have several issues later on. It was the first night, and I hung a 10 by 12 framed papyrus of Tutankhamun, and below it a little heart-shaped mirror, and below it a candle holder. I was 14. Don't ask me. So I turned my light off, got in bed, and tried to go to sleep. But I've always been a night owl, so no sleep was had. I had my bed in the corner across from the door, so I could see out into the kitchen. Now by that point, I had just started to become scared of the dark, but we didn't have all our stuff unpacked yet, so it was pretty dark. I went to adjust and looked at my wall where I'd hung my things. I got pretty freaked out when I couldn't see the outline of them. I kept trying to tell myself it was just too dark and there was too much space. There was no noise or reason to believe the things weren't there. But the more I laid there, the more it freaked me out. And then, down the hall in the kitchen, movement. My parents were already asleep in the room next to mine, and except the light on the stove, the house was pitch black. I watched a boy in pale blue pajamas walk into the kitchen from the living room. At first, I thought the back door had been left unlocked, and because the house had been abandoned for a while, a neighborhood child had wandered in. Teenager logic. He looked to be about 5 or 6, head shaved bald. He stretched his arms behind his back, crossing them and leaning his head back as he looked at the clock on the microwave, and then disappeared. So now I was wide awake and couldn't do the dark anymore, so I got up, closed my door, and turned the light on. I did not get any easement from that though, because those things I hung, yeah, they were in fact not on the wall anymore. The candle holder was in my laundry basket, the mirror was shoved between the laundry basket and the wall, and most terrifyingly, that 10 by 12 framed papyrus that weighed about 8 pounds was across the room, leaning against my dresser, picture facing the wood as if someone didn't want to break the glass on it. I did not get a lot of sleep that night, and I left the light on until the sun came up. Tarot. When I was 15, I dropped out of high school and went to community college to get my GED. I made some friends, and one of them was 17 and worked at Universal Studios. Island of Adventure was pretty new, so we went one afternoon, and there was a tent with tarot readers. I've always been pretty skeptical, in spite of how good I am with tarot and all the paranormal things that have happened, so I wasn't taking it too seriously. So, my friend's reading ended up being way longer than mine, and the lady who had done mine asked if I wanted a free palm reading while I waited because she was practicing. So I said, sure. I don't know how, but this lady saw both of the times I flatlined as a toddler, a complete stranger, so I thought that was pretty cool. I don't remember the rest of the reading, other than she said I had the longest lifeline she's ever seen on a person before. Once she was done, she asked if I had any questions. Well, being a kinda smug 16-year-old, I said, "There's a ghost in my house." She proceeded to tell me he was my grandfather. His name was Oscar. He was buried in the backyard, and he paced the hall in my house because he was very protective of me. Now, my first thought was, Oscar? Oscar the Grouch? Oscar the Cat? Oscar Mayer Wiener? Who comes up with the name Oscar? Well, turns out I have a great-grandfather named Oscar. He died in 1944, and we inherited some of his stuff when my grandfather died in the 90s. She sees us. And finally, one of my most baffling stories. So, I rearranged my room and slept with a nightlight lamp thing after that picture incident, but I would still see that little boy running around the house. I would often think he was my cousin. One night, I turned my lamp on, got in bed, and tried for the 15th time to get one of the cats or dog into the room, to no avail. So, I'm facing the wall, trying to fall asleep, and I feel what I think is the dog finally getting on the bed. So I look up to call her closer. Instead, I see the shadow of a child on the wall and see little hand and knee prints at my knees. So I say, screw this, and I go sleep on the couch with as many lights on as I can get without pissing off my parents. And I stayed there for about 2 months. One night, I woke up to see a scruffy-looking blonde man in 70s cowboy clothes with a hat and boots sitting in the chair across from me. His head is turned, and the Victorian man is standing behind the chair. They're having a conversation in whispers, and the longer I stare at this, trying to figure out what they're saying, the more freaked out I'm getting. I don't remember why, but I moved my foot, and both of them just stop talking and stare at me for a good 30 seconds before the blonde looks back at him and says, "She sees us," and they both just fade away into nothing. I told my neighbor about it the next day, and she had pictures of the previous owners. One of them was the man I saw. He died of cancer in the house in his early 40s.